Can you hear me okay? This is our first of numerous free talks here at the New York Film Festival. We're thrilled to be able to utilize this terrific Eleanor Bunin Monroe Film Center as a gathering place for you during the festival. We invite you to come back most evenings at 7 p.m. for a free conversation, a free discussion. Tomorrow night, Scott Foundas will be here talking with Tom Rothman about the making of Life of Pi, and we'll also have a discussion with numerous filmmakers from the festival up here on stage tomorrow at 7. You can also watch these events live, streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/filmlink. So thank you for being here. We're really thrilled to kick off this session or this season of the festival and talks at the festival with a conversation about film culture and about the New York Film Festival Selection Committee and about their process. We spent the summer talking with a lot of people about the festival and about the impact of the festival, so to sort of get this conversation going and to sort of get you in the mood, so to speak. Jamie Stewart, who's here, over to my left, wave Jamie, has cut together a brief clip with highlights from a few of our conversations with a number of people from the festival over the past few months. So we're going to take a look at that, and then we'll start our conversation. So let's take a look. We'll show the clip at the end of the conversation. We'll give it another second. Sometimes it takes a moment for the screen to show up.
I'm Michael Moore.
Yeah, all right. All right, I think what we're going to do is start the conversation because I don't want to keep you guys waiting too long, and we'll show the clip at the end. So we couldn't think of a better person to moderate this conversation about 50 years of film culture than the man who's seated right in front of me, who will introduce our guests and conduct the conversation. So please join me in welcoming from Focus Features and from numerous films you've seen over the past many years, James Schamus.
Great, thank you guys. Come on up. Thank you. We have all of our panel with us, with the exception of Richard Pena, who's doing an introduction, so he'll be arriving shortly. And we've got approximately 50 or so minutes to talk about 50 years of film culture. Oh, here's Richard arriving now, too, so that's great. And I'll just, rather than give elaborate introductions, I think the most important thing is the conversation. We'll start with Mr. Richard Pena.
Thank you.
And then we have a whole selection of members of the selection committee from this and other years. We have Amy Taubin, that's Todd McCarthy, Scott Foundas, Wendy Keys, Philip Lopate, David Ansen, and Melissa Anderson. So thank you all for coming. This is a very large panel. We're going to try to get some kind of conversation and time for questions and discussion from you guys too into a very short period of time. And it does look like the image is going to work. Maybe not. They're doing that. They're doing that to for the booth. Okay, got it. All right. So and we'll try to get this work from Jamie up on the screen at the very end. So we'll probably run a few minutes over, inclusive of that. So I want to start with one question, really for Richard Pena. Obviously, 25 years, and there's a lot of meta-discourse about your tenure, and this being obviously the last festival.
A lot of meta-discourse when you get down to it.
But you know what? It's justified. It's an amazing run. And there's the simple kind of softball questions. You know, what was it like then? What is it like now? How did it change? But I want to actually ask you a very specific question, not about film, but about culture. Mm-hmm. You know, and it cuts across two ways. You think of the New York Film Festival as a place that celebrates the art of film, right? We'd agree with that. But have you ever shown movies that you showed because maybe they didn't fit the idea of art itself? I mean, movies great movies or not so, or when was the last time you saw a movie you said that's not even a work of art? And the flip side of that is film culture. I mean, culture with a K, culture, a lot of baggage there. Do we need culture to appreciate film as an art? What kind of culture do we need? And what do you think the role has been of your kind of curatorial vision in engaging that discussion?
I guess for the first question, what I'd say is rather than thinking of anything outside of the realm of art, I'd like to think that instead perhaps we challenged or expanded the definition of what some people might consider film art. So in that way, I would say rather than going outside, we just try to expand the envelope. In terms of culture, I think there are a couple of ways of thinking about that. One is to think about film in terms of its dialogue with the other arts, which I think was always part of the intention of starting a film festival at Lincoln Center. In what way does it interface with ideas and themes that are running through other arts at that time? And I think, especially as we reach 50 years, what kind of dialogue is cinema in with itself? What are the films saying in terms of their relationship to films of the past and things like that? And I think both of those things have made the festival in a way always somewhat dialogic. That the films are always themselves, but they're always reaching out beyond themselves, either to other questions about the arts or other questions about cinema.
Being on a selection committee, and I've never been on one, so I'm only speaking from just pure fantasy logic here. I have to imagine there's a fair amount of horse trading, that is to say discussion and then consensus building, but horse trading in the sense that, has it ever happened in your guys' experience, and anybody can take this, I will just open it up, that something got in, and you don't have to say what the film was, but that you just were painfully PO'd about. Was there any time it was just, and what was the nature of that moment for you that clarified for you what was at stake in this process? So I'm trying to give the question both a gossipy side as well as a kind of substantive one.
I'd be happy to take it. Okay. One of the interesting things about the fact that the committee has always been made up of a combination of staff people from Lincoln Center, but also working critics, is that there's any number of us, including myself, who are on the record giving bad reviews to films that were in the New York Film Festival. In my own case, I could single out Julian Schnabel's The Diving Bell and the Butterflies, a film that I panned fairly viciously in the Village Voice and the LA Weekly, but it was in the New York Film Festival, and I think it exposes the fact that the role of the programmer and the role of the critic are inherently different in a key respect, which is that if you had been in Cannes that year, you knew that The Diving Bell and the Butterfly was a very talked about film that a lot of people liked and even thought was a masterpiece, and that it had won a major prize for Best Director, and you just sort of knew this was a film that was going to be in the conversation for the rest of the year. And I think for all of those reasons, and Julian Schnabel's reputation as an artist, and by that point as a filmmaker as well, it was a movie that deserved to be in the New York Film Festival. So actually, in a way, I guess that that's not a film that I was pissed off to see in the festival. It's just a movie that didn't happen to coincide with my own personal taste, but I wasn't against including it. And I think sometimes there may be films that you like personally that you don't think should be in the festival for one reason or another, because perhaps there's too many films of that type in the festival that year, or there are other better films along those lines that you also like. Yeah.
I think maybe to apply that to the current festival, a film that was, I don't want to say scandal, but it was absolutely the most hated and impassioned film in Cannes was Holy Motors. And then even if you're against the film, you decide, well, you have to show it anyway, because why can't people in New York argue about this film just the way they did in Cannes and everywhere else? So you don't want to deny, the potential of that kind of artistic argument or even a scandal. Every good festival can benefit from a scandal once in a while. So scandals become less of a thing now. But still, I think there are reasons other than the pure high quality of a film to show certain films. Now, that's being said, New York is a limited festival. It's not showing 200 films, like Toronto, let's say. But if you're only showing 28, 30 films, you have to be discriminating. But still, there's a place for films that are going to provoke great argument.
In the end, though, I think a film like that would have to have some strong support of the committee.
James, I'd also like to point out that Richard was generous in allowing the other members of the selection committee to have their amor fous, too. And we had, we had films that we would really go to the mat for and champion, while others were rolling their eyes and carrying on. But, you really did, in the end, if you really held hard to your conviction that this was something that deserved the showcase of the festival, you would honor that. And I think that was, so it wasn't as a consensus, it wasn't a vote adding
I
up
agree.
to
Richard tried to please each of us once. I just want to say
Job
that,
and somebody has to
Interpret that as you will.
I really think, looking back that, we had an amazing track record and we have very little to apologize for. Something that I want to apologize for, however, is there was a certain kind of movie that was well made, intelligent, thoughtful, good characters, but not edgy, seen as somehow bourgeois, that very often did not get into the film festival. And recently, there was this incredible, to me, retrospective that Scott and Richard arranged of Claude Sauté's films at the Walter Reed Theater. And I thought, these are magnificent films. They're really psychologically rich, but they didn't signal artiness in that way that we would often invite something that was much more pretentious. So in general, I think we did a brilliant job, but I think every once in a while there were certain films that slipped under the radar because they didn't radiate art film in quite the same way. How many Sautés did get shown in the New York Film Festival, by the way, Scott? Do you know?
I don't think any.
Well, I may point out that Vincent Canby was extremely against Claude Sauté. I think that might have played a role in the perception of his importance at that time.
I don't think any of this.
Yeah, and well, we didn't have the chance to judge too many sautés, actually, at least since '88.
Yeah, but I mean, in the Route era.
In the red era, yeah. Well, there are a lot of rumors about why that was.
I mean, I must say that if I had been on the committee when Philip was there, I would have walked out of the room with the word artiness, which is a word I do not permit anywhere in my presence.
You can walk out now.
I was at my advanced age, this is my first time on the committee, and I was absolutely surprised, really pleasurably surprised, at how amiable it was, and how much I enjoyed talking about films with my colleagues, many of whom I often disagree with. I think that this process, even though the festival is small, it's a different process than being on a jury. Whenever I've been on a jury, there has been a lot of horse trading. And that's because, in the end, you're coming up with a very small list. Here, there's more room for play. And also, I think everyone has this goal of wanting to have the most inclusive, in terms of genres, festival possible. That it's about expanding the definition of what a very good or a great film is. That there are many forms to be realized in many different ways.
Speaking of inclusiveness, clearly there are some narratives that attach themselves to Richard, your era, but that when you go back and look at the history of the festival, I think some of those narratives aren't quite as strongly supported by the evidence. You came and expanded into Asia and other, and then of course you go back to the first festivals and there's Ichikawa and there's, Sachichi, et cetera, et cetera. But the nature of that expansion or the nature of that narrative coming in to feel that way certainly has played a role in the last 25 years. And at the same time, this kind of undercurrent of a Francophile culture that gets kind of liberates the discourse about film culture itself still seems to be part of the DNA of the festival. Other kinds of inclusiveness, or kind of, for example, female directors, women directors, feels like there's not I'm not sure what that narrative is. Do these kinds of ideas enter into your discussions as you're putting the final list together every year? A little bit of one from here, one from there. What do we got from this thing? Or how has that worked? How has that played? Certainly it plays in the public discourse about the film. How does it play internally in your guys' process?
Well, to take the last part of the question, it was quite noted, for good reasons, that at Cannes this year there wasn't one woman in the official competition. And, there was even a protest and a petition that went around and things like that. And I guess I knew of a few women directors whose work I really admired, who had work coming up, and so I hoped that something would appear for us. But I have to say, at this point, now that I'm leaving, I would find it extremely difficult to do a New York Film Festival without a women director. I would scour everywhere I could to make sure that I found, because it just would seem to me kind of like the absolute wrong signal to send. And fortunately, I've never had to do that. We've always come up with a film by a female director. But I have to say, Terry Frommeau, for his part, could just say, hey, I didn't see any films by women I liked. I couldn't. I think that deep down, I would have done whatever to try and find something. And as I said, fortunately, in my 25 years, that was never truly an issue, except one year. But
I don't know, it's interesting for me. I served on the selection committee for 8 years, and now I'm programming the Los Angeles Film Festival, which is a very different kind of festival. And I can't remember that issue really coming up in our years. It just wasn't, it wasn't an issue because there were films by women directors. Whereas in Los Angeles, where we show a lot of films by women directors, it's a bigger festival. It's a festival that is trying to sort of reflect the diversity of Los Angeles in a sense that I don't think we did here. So there is a more conscious effort to kind of get films from everywhere that represent different facets of the city. But there definitely was horse trading in our years. I mean, I can certainly think of examples where, as you said, everyone was allowed their amour fou. Remember, there was, I won't mention any titles, but Jonathan Rosenbaum had an amour fou one year that we thought was particularly fou, but he felt a lot of amour, so he got his way, which was good, because we all had that. I mean, I remember there was a documentary that I championed, which I insisted people go back and watch more of, because it had a big twist that they hadn't gotten to, and indeed it made the difference when the whole film was seen. I mean, that's all other question that comes up, like how much of a movie do you watch as a committee? I mean, my nightmare is that the year, I kept thinking, what if we had shut off The Crying Game after the first reel? These things happen.
Well, I have to say that I've been on the committee for 3 years now, and what I was really impressed at, maybe things have changed a little bit, because I don't feel like we all got kind of one freebie or whatever. It was, because what I was impressed with.
I let them think that.
Yeah, but more along the lines of what Amy was saying, the amiability of it. Because Richard really has gone, at least in my time here, for a consensus. And it doesn't mean we're all going to agree on every film, but it's kind of a rolling ocean, let's say. I mean, that we can all agree on this, and maybe only 3 on this one, but it kind of rolls in a way that by the end, in every instance, all 3 years that I've been on it, it's felt right at the end. And I could easily imagine falling into the temptation, if you're the head of the festival, to say, I'm going to show this, and I don't give a damn what the rest of you think. That you could be more of a dictator about it than you, in my experience, have been. You've always gone for consensus, and I think it's worked out quite well.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just say, I don't know if I ever really myself said, okay, I'm just going to let them have, their amour fou. I honestly don't think I ever really did that. What I would say is I really count passion a lot. And if, a David Ansen or a Wendy Keyes or not Philip Lopate, anyways, are really passionate about something, I want to know why. and I want to know what is it about that film. And even if I'm not getting it, their passion often wins me over on the level of passion, that obviously there's something there that truly excites these people who I know and respect and whatever. So anyway, I think of it more in those terms, that, there was a little bit of unequal scaling, that if someone really argued vehemently, even if he or she were in a minority, that would count a lot for me. And obviously we don't have that many places to play around like that, but when there was something like that, I often thought, okay, let's just go in that direction and see. And very often, you were right. These were films that, at least for part of the audience, would also be accepted, in that way.
Just to add to what Richard has said and what Todd has said as well, I think one of the things I've learned the most in my 4 years on the committee is you really have to present a sharp argument for why you love or hate something. I think my first year, maybe even maybe all 4 years that I've done this, I sometimes think that my instinct is just to blow up in a rage or to get swept up in liking something so much. But one thing I appreciate about the whole process is that if you really do despise something, and I will not mention any names of titles, but I remember one screening very late in our process in the summer. All five of us saw something and having a very heated argument in the lobby of Walter Reed about why I thought there's just no way we should see this film. I think it may have made some impression on you, Richard, or maybe you just wanted this crazy woman to shut up. I don't know. But no, you really have to articulate why something should be in or why something should be kept out. So you have to be sharp.
Yeah, and I just want to, because there's no one on the panel tonight who served under Richard Roud. I wish Jim Hoberman were here, but I'll try to speak for Jim because the selection process was very different then. And Jim, who served under Roud and another term under this Richard, said that basically under Richard Roud, the films were sort of scored numerically, and those that had the highest score got in. So he figured out pretty early on that if he rigged his scores so that he gave exaggerated high scores to the films that he really wanted in the festival and exaggerated low scores to everything else, then he could sort of get more of his movies through. And there wasn't this sort of consensus thing. And also Roud would keep a couple of slots for his own personal choices, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's reported in... That's reported in Gavin.
They tell me.
I think that's in Gavin Smith's article on the history of the festival. That's in the current issue of Film Comment. So the way of selecting the films, that everyone is talking about here, really is very much Richard's contribution to the festival.
Yeah, and I think the passion goes two ways. It's films that you love, and there's the Amor Fous, and then the OMDB, which is Over My Dead Body films. Where you really, this is probably what you were talking about. But the rule of thumb is if you can keep arguing with Richard past 3 a.m., he'll finally give in. I remember there was one film that you and I argued over, the Court of the Sun, which I really wanted to get in there, and I think Hoberman was on the board, was on the committee and wanted it also, or Kent, and Richard didn't want it in, and I read with some envy you're saying in one interview that when you would listen to John Powers, and really take it seriously. You never listened to me that way, But that film did get in after all, and I was right too.
No.
I'd like to talk about another aspect of the process, and that is that it's really an endurance contest. There was one member of the committee who came in and went out of the gate very fast, very noisy, very engaged, very argumentative, very on. And by the time we sat down for our deliberations, she oops, I just blew it. She had run out of energy, basically, because that 2-week stretch when we're doing the final blitz of seeing things starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and until 11, and then sent home with cassettes that you had to report on at 7:30 in the morning. It was really a physically enduring process, And you just have to be sure that you save a little energy for the end so that you can really go to bat for the films that you want.
I'm going to say over the course of 2 weeks, when you're seeing so much and then some stuff gets turned off and on, what you really find though is that some stuff just pops and you've never heard of this filmmaker, you don't know where this film is from, and it just suddenly you're grabbed by it. And I think, well, I can say one example of that was this. Who knew? I mean, this Filipino film called Buaka. I mean, we didn't know what the hell this was, and just turned it on, and we were all just, man, this is fabulous. And you just kept watching it. Time disappeared. We just watched the whole thing. That was absolutely great. And that fortunately happens, and it's like a grace note and a blessing when that happens, because it's just so. That's part of that endurance contest. That sometimes you're just so elated that you can tell immediately that this is film to take.
And I can just see it now, 11 p.m., somebody pops the Bellatar into the DVD machine.
Always wise to schedule very late in the day, yeah.
Every festival has its own internal architecture that supports its mission, and it's attached in some ways to the flow of programming and the way in which films get presented. Obviously, New York has a very, very special and unique architecture, given the home it has and the relative paucity of number of selections and the gravitas and weight of the selections themselves, that evens that out. But we've seen that architecture change over the years, and centerpieces and closing nights and galas and things like this. You've seen a little bit of the pressure of, I guess, what's going on in the rest of the world in the industry hit the festival. At the same time, opening nights are, some of us go to way too many festivals. Really, what I love about the New York Film Festival is that, Richard, is the opening night is really not automatically opening night as it is in other festivals, where the studio film comes in, the stars get flown in, a lot of pictures get taken, there's a party, and everybody leaves, and then you have the real festival that follows it. And so you can accommodate both the big studio pictures that, and luckily, like Life of Pi last night, that are just at the absolute height of, I'll use it, artiness or art. But also, you've subjected a fair number of your donors over the years to I'd say some l'amour fou. How does the opening night decision get made in that context? When you guys know that a late Rivette, no matter how fantastic it is, how many fond memories we all have of Paris nous appartient, a lot of people who write checks might not have the same enthusiasm. How does that play in your decisions?
Well, as I've mentioned a few times, for the last 25 years, opening night has been the bane of my existence. So, it really is never easy. You have to find, first of all, obviously, I'm glad to hear you say what you said, because we've never chosen an opening night film just because we needed an opening night film. It was always a film we were proud to have within the selection of the festival, but in addition to that, it was a film that we felt was more accessible for the people who come opening night, who very often are not our hardcore, more cinephilic audiences, but donors, patrons, benefactors, all kinds of other board people who, obviously support us, but aren't perhaps the most open to cinematic experimentation, things like that. Plus, of course, you have this huge party that follows, so,
So that's why you chose Notre Musique, I think, for...
we did not have Notre Musique, no.
No, which one was it? It was...
In Praise of Love was closing night.
Praise of Love.
Closing night. No, but those are circumstances. We chose, for example, Va Savoir in 2001. Now, this was the first, I think, major cultural event in New York City after 9/11. I think people were in no mood for anything, and I think the Rivette seemed frothy and Gallic and just, it was just the wrong, I don't know if it would have been as badly accepted if 9/11 hadn't happened, nor would people be, livid at me for showing an anti-American film, which they, adduced in Praise of Love being, if the U.S. wasn't, an open wound as it was after 9/11. So, there's circumstance. Now, these films were picked mid-August. So, long before we got to, the festival, obviously there was this traumatic event that happened, which I think changed the color of everything. There are also things that happen, for example, my favorite, least favorite memory, and Wendy can share this with me, asking Philip, Miller's Crossing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Miller's Crossing. This was a movie we really liked, and I still like it tremendously. And when I think about what went wrong with Miller's Crossing, because we were very enthusiastic about it, there were two things. One was that it was shown in A.V. Fisher Hall, which Dirty Little Secret did not have as good sound and that's why we ended up trying to show films with subtitles, because when you show an American film, especially with actors who mumble, the sound wasn't as crisp as it should have been. The second thing is that, for want of a better way of putting it, it's grim. It's a downer. And when you think of people going into a movie like Miller's Crossing, where everybody either gets killed or gets, demoralized, and then having a party afterwards, there is that party afterwards, to think about, So that was one where we were all on board. We all loved it, and it just did not work,
But what also didn't work that year is we received, first of all, not only a devastating review of the film by Vincent Canby, but he went on to say, but you have to have sympathy for the people at the New York Film Festival, because every year they have this opening night where all these kind of rich buffoons go, and they have to find something that will entertain them. So it was just, so he not only insulted the film, he insulted the audience. So they were really delighted to be there that night. Now that was really, I'll never forget what a hellish experience, because literally 15 minutes into the film, and Avery Fisher Hall has 2,700 people. People just started leaving, and they didn't stop.
Yeah.
They didn't stop. It was the entire film. You heard seats going up and people walking down the aisles.
That is one difference, I think, from the real.
About how much they hated it.
That is one difference from the old days, is that, especially during the Roud years and in the beginning of, I was during the first on the first selection committee when Richard took over. People would walk out more if you showed them a difficult film like The Truck by Margaret Durand. They were so deeply offended by that kind of film, And when we showed, when you guys showed, The Turin Horse, everybody was very respectful. It's as though there was a whole, as though the level had been increased.
This is the definition of culture. You're too embarrassed to walk out. I think we have time for some questions. There is a wireless microphone that I'm holding, which I will gladly give up, and Eugene will pass it to you if you have a question or comment. Question?
You guys obviously get really attached to these films. Are you ever personally disappointed when they don't get picked up for distribution? As a viewer, I am. I remember Black Venus being a real disappointment for me to not have my friends see it.
Well, I'm really glad you asked about that film, because when we just did this, that's a classic example of a movie that was loved by the selection committee unanimously, and then the public screening was like a cold shower. It was you don't get quite the violent reactions. I was just going to say, thinking about what Philip was saying, because somebody who had a film in the festival the same year as Bertolucci's Luna, told me the story of that opening night, in which the audience stayed only so they could violently boo Bertolucci when the spotlight went on, and he just sat there kind of saying, more, but Black Venus was close to that. It was a very violent. I think Melissa actually, who moderated the Q&A with the wonderful actress from the film, who was assaulted with hostile questions such as why did she allow the filmmaker to exploit her in this way, and that sort of thing. So we made a point actually of bringing that film back a few weeks ago as the penultimate film in our 50 years of the New York Film Festival retrospective, because it's a film that even though it didn't go over well in the festival, we still believe was a great film and deserved to be included. And I think sometimes films aren't properly received in their moment. I think the reason that The Turin Horse was so well received in the festival last year is because over time people have really come to understand and appreciate the work of Bellatar in a way they might not have when he first appeared on the scene. So certain films and certain filmmakers, I think over time the audience comes to appreciate or understand them in a way that maybe they didn't when they first appeared, and that's one of the missions of the festival in a way.
Yeah, I think if we showed Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days now, after Hurt Locker, it would get a very different reception. This is one of the most hostile Q&A sessions I ever had to run. what was interesting was that the first screening of it, which was the centerpiece, all the stars were there, and stars tame an audience. Everyone is on good behavior when there's a movie star there. The second, it was a weekend matinee, and it was just Jay Cox, the screenwriter, and Catherine, and I was moderating. And poor Catherine, I mean, she was getting really hateful remarks. People were very offended by the movie. There's a scene in it in which a woman is forced to watch her own rape, and it called up all sorts of deep emotions in the audience. And there was a guy up in the it was your nightmare Q&A. There was a guy up in the balcony who yelled out, "I've been coming to the New York Film Festival for 30 years, and I want to know, and this is the worst piece of shit I've ever seen here, and I want to know why you, David Ansen, programmed this." And I said, "Well, you know, this is a Q&A session for the, you know, I'm happy to talk to you after. This is a Q&A session for the cop out," he screamed. So I rattled off my defense of the movie, and half of the audience applauded and the other half booed, and we were never so happy to get off a stage as we were after that one. But it is a question of timing, because I think, you know, Catherine Bigelow was not what she is now, you know, and I think it was in our, you know, to our credit that we showed her then, and have been proven right, but not everybody agrees with us.
But to go back to the issue of distribution, I think one of the advantages of our being a small festival is that we know the distributors, and we try, not always successfully, to match up the distributors with the filmmakers. And I mean, we have had successes in that way, and it's, I think, because we've been around so long, we have deep relationships with the people who work on the business end of exhibition. We really are proud of that being sort of a under the radar kind of part of what our mandate is.
Yeah, I think also there's a larger issue underlying it, and I don't quite understand it, but it has to do with cinephilia and the notion now that cinema, as, you know, you go to church, and frankly, I was at the first New York Film Festival, and I've been at every one since. And there was a sense that you were going to this church of cinema in which there were various sects, and everyone was on everyone else's case, and, you know, the room was incredibly polarized, and that was a good thing. And now I think we have something like, there are more people who consider themselves to have advanced cases of cinephilia, but they are much more terminal cases, moderate, or just exhausted in their response. So you have a much more acceptance. Oh yes, I'll sit through 6 hours of Bellatar, and it must be, you know, I'll go with it. That was not the case in the 60s and 70s even.
I mean, I can even recall sometimes sort of late in Richard Rad's tenure, where even in my tenure, when short films, received unbelievably hostile. We used to show shorts before features. People standing on their feet screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" Yeah. Where are those people now?
There is
Selection committee.
The audience has a sense of what a New York Film Festival film is that's sometimes different from the committee. So, for instance, one year when I was on, we showed The King of New York, an Abel Ferrara film. And the audience, you know, very enlightened, humanistic people, did not feel that what they regarded as this piece of trash should be shown in the New York Film Festival. It was too violent. It seemed to be in support of crime or something like that. And we had all the stars there, but, you know, Christopher Walken was... he was pacing a great deal, and I don't want to say anything about what he was on at the time. But anyway, or Abel Ferrara. But they did not calm the audience down, and I did the Q&A. But you know, in terms of distribution, I mean, it is a kind of hurtful thing to me that some of my favorite directors, like Ho Xiaoshen and Abbas Kiarostami, have had very limited distribution opportunities. Sometimes the films didn't get distributed, even though they were masterpieces. Sometimes they got distributed for a week, you know.
No, I mean, actually, I mean, when people talk about what's different, when I was growing up, you'd go to the New York Film Festival and see a film, or if you didn't, all the films within 6 months were released in New York City in some kind of run, few weeks, sometimes even more. But then after that, they would enter into a kind of repertory circuit, which back then was represented by the Bleecker, the Carnegie, the Thalia, the Elgin, so that you could continue to see these films, so that, a weekend, 2 years after it was in the New York Film Festival, was still projected 3 or 4 times a year. That just doesn't happen nowadays. I mean, now, if you don't see a film in the New York Film Festival, or if it's lucky enough to get a run, you won't see it projected unless one of the nonprofits picks it up.
You see it on BitTorrent.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I have to take off and do a Q&A with the Taviani brothers, so you'll excuse me, but continue. Thank you very much.
We have a question right here.
Hi. You referred to the New York Film Festival being this church of film in New York, and it is. It's 50 years old now. I'm just curious, in its run, it's built up a reputation of showing these very, of course, dramatic films from all these great dramatic directors. Where does it stand, do you feel, right now in terms of comedy? Would you guys show a comedy, a straightforward comedy, say, on a dramatic subject, or do you feel that the audience or the committee members have this mindset of, well, we should be programming these kind of films? Are you open at this point to that, or are you somewhat, is there a fear of, well, it doesn't really fit into the tradition of what we've programmed in the past?
Don't forget the unintentionally comic.
No, but you could have seen earlier today Camille Rewinds, which is a remake. First of all, it's a comedy, and it's a remake of Peggy Sue Got Married, which was also shown in the New York Film Festival, and many others, going back to Bob and Carol and Ted and Allison.
Yeah, when James was asking about balance is not just, do we have enough from Eastern Europe as opposed to Latin America? Balance is also, we've got 4 films where people commit suicide and 7 where they vomit, well, maybe we need a little balance here, And we did think about that kind of thing, Like,
But as they say, comedy is hard. And we certainly looked for them, and we found some of them, but it is hard.
And also, knowing just from the perspective of an international distributor, comedy is a very local phenomenon often. It's rare that comedies travel across borders unless they happen to be silent. But it's a tough genre to sell in the context. Again, when you're talking culture, in fact, comedies drive local language cinemas around the world. From India to Germany, Scandinavia, France, they dominate box office, but they are not drivers of the international exchange of cinema culture. So it's I think the question really hits that.
But the last Suleiman Cissé film we showed was a comedy from Mali, and then there was the film, the Egyptian film about divorce. I can't remember the name of it. Was it the Shaheen? There was a.
Yeah, the one about the.
It was a.
Silence.
Silence, we're rolling.
Right. So there are, every so often, and it's quite wonderful to find yourself laughing at these melodramas that are designed for strictly, they don't have any idea that they'll ever be shown outside of Egypt or Mali, but when you can enjoy them, those are little treasures.
Hi, I've enjoyed this festival for 20 of the 50 years, so thank you. I just came from Camille Rewinds, and I just wondered if you could maybe trace the path of that film, for example, or another film, just sort of how it, goes through the selection process. Does each film have a different journey, or is it relatively the same?
May I take this one?
Please.
I think, was I the only one who saw Camille Rewinds at Cannes, and this was a film I thought was absolutely marvelous. And then my 4 other colleagues saw it over the summer and also thought it was marvelous. So it was a very easy decision for us. And I think all of us have really been big fans of Naomi Lavovsky, who's the star and the director and the co-screenwriter, as an actress. And I think we're very excited to give her a larger platform, to introduce her to New York audiences who may not know her as well. So I think it was not a hard decision at all, and actually something quite delightful. And I just did the Q&A with her, and she is a lovely, lovely person. And yes, it was a happy charm fairy tale for everybody involved, I think.
In a way, it shows a little bit how the Film Society works as well. We've had Noémie twice in Rendezvous with French Cinema. So very often people sort of come to our programs through a Walter Reed program or through New Directors, New Films, and then go into the festival. So that was her trajectory in that way.
But it's definitely true that different films have different paths. I mean, the film that Todd mentioned, Buakaw from the Philippines, is one of the films that sort of just came in through the regular submission process over the summer, and it's by a filmmaker none of us were familiar with, even though he's directed a handful of previous films that really weren't seen outside of the Philippines. So, sometimes we see a film because it's shown in a big festival like Berlin or Cannes, and sometimes we see something just because it comes in over the transom, as it were, or somebody that we know recommends it to us. Each film sort of has its own way of finding its way into the festival.
I'm going to excuse myself as well. I have to go across the street and do the Rolling Stones.
So now we can talk about
Charlie is my darling, I know. Now the fun begins.
Or maybe the committee can start voting themselves off one by one. Any other questions?
I had a question that I want to throw out. As I know we're wrapping up, but I thought it's always great to hear programmers put in plugs, as we all have our Netflix queue and all the movies we're trying to always catch up with. It's been great hearing about movies from the past that you sort of were passionate about. I think it would be great to hear about maybe from past selection committee members as well as new selection committee members maybe talking about this year's festival, sort of movies that you're particularly, in the case of older films, movies that might have just somehow now are just forgotten. Movies that, maybe folks like us in the audience might, Wendy, Philip, David, movies that you're passionate about from a past festival that you think we should rediscover, perhaps. And then for those on the committee now, as we're planning out what we're going to see this next couple of weeks, movies that we absolutely should not miss.
Well, gosh, there's a lot I could mention. I mean, one film that I think, and fortunately it actually did get revived by Lincoln Center when you did your series of some of the sort of greatest hits, is an Italian film called L'America by Gianni Emilio, who's a director who's been kind of forgotten about. In fact, his last film, which was based on the last Camus novel, which we showed in LA, is not shown anywhere else in the US. It's called The First Man, which is based on that. But L'America is a film set in Albania, and one of the first movies to sort of he's an extraordinary filmmaker, and I urge you to seek it out. Deals with a young Italian businessman who goes to Albania and sort of his encounter. It's sort of the first world encountering the third world, and it's a film of incredible beauty and toughness.
Are you calling Italy the first world?
It was when that film was made.
One of those surprises that we've been talking about, and a comedy, was a film called The Plot Against Harry. That was made by Michael Romer, and it was so charming, it was so fresh, and it was shot in New York, and completely New York comic local film, and in black and white, and totally enjoyable, but I don't know if it's disappeared or if you can still see it anywhere.
It's relatively newly on DVD, actually. You can get it now. Yeah.
DVD. And then a film that I saw about the second or third year of the film festival that I think is a towering masterpiece that got booed was Dry as Gertrude, which is always worth seeing and checking out. And I think James has had a few things to say about that one too.
Well, yeah, just a shameless plug. You got to read the book about Gertrude. Come on.
Yes. And he wrote a whole book about it. Yeah, exactly. Great
that
film.
Really is the definition of cinephilia, to my mind. Getting back to this topic, to me, what Amy was saying is, it really is the love of something that only you have seen. So hence my
Very
book on
exclusive,
Gertrude. We have time probably just for one more response to that question before we have to.
Well, I'd just like to follow up on The Trouble with Harry. This is a good example of what the festival, Plot Against Harry, what the festival can do. This was a film that had not been seen for about 20 years, and the director Michael Romer was putting together a version for the DVD, and the editor said, this is really pretty good. You should show it to somebody. And so he sent it to us, and we loved it. And if it wasn't for us showing it, it would, it would have gone straight to DVD without any fanfare whatsoever, because Michael's a very low-key guy. And the other film that I was always sort of puzzled why it didn't make it. Maybe you all have reasons why it didn't, but I thought David Byrne's True Stories was kind of a lot of fun, and it never really went anywhere. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I would put it on your Netflix list if it's available.
Very quickly, there is another Michael Romer film which is playing in one of the sidebars.
Yeah, Nothing But a Man.
Nothing But a Man. Michael Romer will be here for that, along with Robert M. Young, his cinematographer, and an indie film legend.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to all the members of the committees over time. This has really been a great window onto what you guys do. It's always a bit of a mystery to me, except when you pass on 90% of my submissions.
Well, that's why you need to be on the committee.
Absolutely, I got to do it someday. But it really, and my attitude has always been: we make them, you guys select them. There's never. I always have that very philosophical attitude. But to know the kind of sense of, and that comes through for me when we talk about film culture that you guys embody. And it came out even in the first answer about some of the criterion for selection. You talked about discussion, that some films need to be talked about. And it sounds like these discussions, if we could listen in, I think we'd all be even greater cinephiles. I mean, I think there seems to be something so respectful about what you guys do and how you do it, which doesn't mean that you give up your opinions. Clearly the most opinionated people you'll ever meet, even in New York. But it's just great, and I think that speaks to the strength of the institution, but the institution is people. So thank you. We have now, for those of you who want to stay, and I hope it's all of you, a few minutes from Jamie Stewart that will actually fill in, I think, with some sound and image what we've been talking about. But in the meantime, thanks and some applause.